This is going to be an exciting panel on global policy approaches. Now, this will be a two-part session with two dynamic speakers. The first one up is Monica Kesar, Head of Social Policy Division, Directorate of Employment, Labor and Social Affairs at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in Paris. She will kick it off and she will share global longevity and workforce trends, some of the things that Joanne alluded to in her remarks. And then immediately following, Diana Wu David will deliver a TED kind of talk. Diana joins us from Hong Kong. She is author of a book that is appropriately titled, because I think this is what we all feel and the challenge that we're all wrestling with in all of our organizations, and that is Future-Proof: Reinventing Work in the Age of Acceleration. So, take it away, Monica.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much to AARP for inviting the OECD, our partner in this new exciting project, to this summit. I'm delighted to be here, and I will be sharing some global trends in OECD countries. Just to recap, perhaps, the OECD is an international organization that has 36 member countries, and we monitor economic, social, environmental, and many other developments around the world. So usually when somebody from the OECD takes the stage, you have to brace for lots of numbers. And this is what I'm going to do now. I'm going to show you a few global trends, but, and then I also highlight where the US is in comparison to some of the other countries. The first big trend that we're monitoring at the OECD, like many other organizations around the world, is what is happening in these huge technological and broader economic transformation that the world is going through. And here I've brought for you some of the numbers. Let's take a look first at global employment rates. And this is very interesting. We have seen that between 1990 and 2017, so over 27 years, employment rates have pretty much risen almost everywhere except in the United States. They've gone down in the United States. But you can see there's a huge increase in Japan, for example. Just below you have the United States. Germany, very large increase. And this is partly because we have older workers in the workforce in some of the countries, but also, and this was alluded to earlier, Joanne also mentioned it in her opening remarks, we also have many more women entering the workforce. And another big trend that has been happening is the change in the composition of economic activity in OECD countries. Manufacturing has dropped by 20%, employment in manufacturing, and services on average in OECD countries has increased by 27%. And this is, of course, something that has massive implications for the way jobs are designed, the wages that are paid, and the skills that are needed. Now, does this mean, with all the technological change, that we're going towards a jobless future? The good news is no, we are not going towards a jobless future. As was said many times this morning already, we're going towards a future where jobs will require much more adaptation. And we've brought for you here some of the numbers. We have the numbers of robots increasing, the use of robots increasing in all of the OECD countries. We have some projections into the future. And there's been a lot of hype, I would almost say, around whether all the jobs are going to be disappearing. Many of you have perhaps heard of the study by Frey and Osborne, which said 50% of all jobs are going to be gone. People are just going to be not in work. And we looked at the OECD, we decomposed jobs not into just taking occupations and saying everybody who is doing an automatable job is going to lose it, but we looked at the different tasks that are within occupations, and then looked at how many of in each of the occupations, how many tasks are automatable. And we came up with a much lower number of 14% on average in OECD countries of jobs where more than 70% of the different tasks could be automated. And when you say more than 70% of the tasks, it looks pretty probable that it actually will be automated. So these 14% of jobs will likely disappear. But, I mean, 14% doesn't sound a lot, but of course it still affects a lot of people. So we do have to worry about this nevertheless. The other big change will come in the jobs where people need to adapt to new tasks, and that is 32%. So if you take these two together, we have almost half of all the jobs that are going to be affected by massive change, and people will have to adapt to that. The other side, which we often forget, is that more than 50% of the jobs, according to these current projections, aren't going to change that much. And this is also something we need to prepare for. And I personally find we sometimes focus almost exclusively in the debate on everything that's new. But let's not forget about traditional jobs which will remain and which we also have to care about and make sure that we have good job conditions for the people working in the other half of the jobs. Now, all of this technological change is taking place in a context of very positive news, and that is population aging. And population aging is often portrayed as something which is a huge problem. It's fundamentally good news, as we saw in the video this morning. The projections of how many people are going to not only live until 100, but live more healthily these longer lives. And here I've brought for you some of the data on the gains in health-adjusted life expectancy. And the good news is that on average in OECD countries, there's a life expectancy increase between 2000 and 2016, so over 1.5 decades, of 3.6 years on average. And 83% of these years are healthy years that are added. So often you hear in policy debates when it's about raising retirement ages, cutting early retirement avenues and so on, people say, but no, life expectancy is increasing, but they're all going to be sick. They're all going to be in long-term care. This data shows you that this is not the case. However, there's a little kind of not so nice message here as well. Look at the United States. It's at the way left end of that chart. And in the United States, the life expectancy increase has only been 1.6 extra years compared to 3.6 in OECD countries overall. However, the thing to retain here is it's an overall good news, but also poses an additional challenge to the labor market, which is why it is so important what AARP is doing, reminding us on a daily basis that this is a challenge we have to all deal with in all countries. Now, what is happening to employment rates among older workers? And here again, it's worth breaking down the averages and looking at not only at the age group, here you have the age group age 55 to 64, but to look at inequality within those age groups. And you can see here we've broken it down. We've broken down the employment rates between people with high education levels, medium education levels, and low education levels. And the average rate of employment for these older workers with high employment is 73%. But with low education, it's only 45%. And you can see there's not a single country where the dots are inverted or even very close. There's a few countries, when Iceland is the best performer, where there's very high employment rates for older workers with high and medium education levels. But already you see a substantial drop for those with low education levels. And it goes on for many, many countries. And the US, just for the records, is average on all three of those. So you're right in the OECD average for all of those three education levels. Now this means that we do have to pay special attention to people with low education levels. And partly this is a skills story, obviously. We need to upskill a lot, but it's not the only story. We also have to worry about health. We really have to worry about work conditions. And you know, it was wonderful to listen to Madeleine Albright this morning saying that she will never retire. And most of us in this room probably are going to be in a position to work very long. And we will work very long, very happily, because most of us have pretty interesting jobs. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here today. But we also have to really pay attention to or acknowledge honestly that this is not the case for everybody and that we do need much more effort on those lower education levels to make sure that everybody can participate. Now, coming to the multi-generational workforce issue, We've also looked at how the labor market outcomes are changing between different age groups and skills levels. And here I've brought for you 3 different indicators, if you like: non-employment, underemployment, and job tenure. And on non-employment, you can see that it's quite low for older, high-skilled male workers, but the big problems are for young, low-skilled male workers. And actually, if you look at 2006 versus 2016, 2016 is the little green diamond, it's increased, and you're almost at 45% of young, low-skilled male workers who are in non-employment. You see that it's not as dramatic for underemployment, but again, the young, low-skilled male people are much worse off than the older, high-skilled. And then an interesting point is job tenure. Job tenure is quite high and has been increasing in many OECD countries, but this is due to the aging of the workforce. So you see a very clear segmentation. When we first looked at the numbers, we thought, what's going on here? Because apparently everything's becoming more precarious, more standard and non-standard work, much more fluid labor market developments. But we saw increasing job tenure rates until we decomposed into age groups. And when we looked at the age groups, we saw that the younger people have much harder times keeping stable jobs, and there's much more churning, and the older people, through the aging of the workforce, they have longer tenure because people have been in their jobs a long time. They stay in the workforce longer, and that influences those indicators. And I think this really is a huge call to looking at a multi-generational workforce where we really have to worry about everybody. So not only is it a strong argument in terms of company arguments, which we just heard this morning, but if you look at the macro picture, which this is, it also shows you that we need to worry about it. Now, we have a whole series of recommendations looking at adult learning. We think that this is one of the most important issues and policy measures at all levels, workers, companies, governments, to address the challenges of population aging and the changes of the future of work. So the share of high-skilled jobs has increased by 25% over the past 2 decades, which means workers need to follow. But, and here's the bad news, 6 out of 10 adults lack the basic skills, basic ICT skills, or they have no computer experience. Again, I think what Joanne was telling us this morning about the use of mobile phones and so on, I think the US are certainly a pioneer country, but many other OECD countries, they're not as far. And no basic skills means that people can't really write emails. And that's a shockingly high number. And what is really worrisome also is that those who are most vulnerable are those precisely who are the least likely to participate in training. So the people who go to training are high-skilled with nice jobs and much more job security. Those who are at risk of their jobs being automated, who have low skills, who are self-employed or temporary workers, have much less participation in training. So this is another area where really much more has to happen, and it has to happen on all sides. Governments need to take policies to encourage training, but also workers need to take the training opportunities up. So among those policy directions, we call them here, we say we need to foster a mindset for learning among firms and individuals. And it's very funny when you listen to employers and trade unions discussing this. The employers say, we're spending lots of money, but nobody's coming. And then the trade unions will tell you, no, but this is being offered, but it's not the right thing that's being offered, and people do not have the time and cannot afford to take it because their employer won't let them take it. So there's things to sort out here to understand better what exactly is going on in the company. And that is also, again, why we're so excited working here in this project with WEF and AARP to find out more what really is it that makes this work at the company level. We also, as I said, we need to make sure that adult learning is really targeted on those who need it most. And an important point, training rights need to be made portable. Because in too many countries, it is still the case that whether you can be trained or not depends on your job with a certain employer. And when you change jobs, all your credits, you've worked for somebody 10, 15 years, you go to a new place, and then suddenly you have no more such rights. So one strong policy push you will be hearing from the OECD more and more is to make this portable. And then the financial burden of scaling up training is something that we also need to find some solutions for. And I think particularly smaller and medium-sized enterprises, they cannot be asked to bear this burden alone because the training itself is expensive, but also the absence of the workers for a small company is something that is much harder to manage than for a multinational. Now, we have called this a transition agenda. We're saying what has been happening until now has been action on the margin, and this will no longer be sufficient. And that's a very strong call. We need a whole of government approach. We need all the different ministries to get together. We need to take a life course approach. And we've all heard lifelong learning and so on, but we really need to take this seriously. And when we say lifelong learning, it doesn't start at 40 or 45. It actually starts at age 2, almost. You have to start with children and take learning all along the life course. And we've done a very interesting study called Preventing Aging Unequally, and it showed you that the inequality just rises and rises and rises, and at age 50, it's finished. It is locked in, and there's almost nothing you can do about it. So this is why we have such a strong call for lifelong learning. And the other points I've already mentioned, we need adequate funding, big elephant in the room, spending reviews to understand better what is the most cost-effective way to provide training. And we call this politely improve revenue sources. Now, I think this is a societal debate. Where is this money going to come from? There's a lot of talk about digital taxes. There's a lot of talk about better taxing digital firms. So there is revenue to be had. Now, of course, everybody would like to use it for different purposes, but we think that one worthwhile and central purpose would be to spend this on more lifelong learning. And I thank you very much for your attention.
This is my best friend. She and I went to college in Los Angeles together and then moved to New York and were roommates in an illegal sublet, of course. She worked in a chairman's office of a prestigious firm and I for a former White House official. Then we both went abroad, her to Germany and I to Hong Kong. Decades ago. And we married what we used to joke was two halves of the perfect guy. Hers, meticulous, organized, bit workaholic, and always optimizing their insurance. And mine, proposing to me at a gala spontaneously in front of 500 people. I used to tell her, I would kill for somebody to optimize my insurance. Fast forward to a few years ago. When she was served divorce papers, she found out there wasn't really any insurance for her. She drove home and placed a bag over her head and pulled the cord around her neck. She felt like she was too young to retire and too old to start over again. And maybe she was wrong, but the reality is that her perception was her reality. Now, I think perception is reality in many of your organizations and all over. I had a LinkedIn post actually last week that went viral about the future of work. And I was really interested. 10,000 people talked about what they loved or hated. And one of the big trends was, we're not getting the information. We feel like our leaders are not doing things for us. We just feel left out. And I think that as leaders, we stand up on stage and we say, it's going to be great. And unemployment is at 3.8%, and we really need more talent, and we're just trying to find the right talent. But for those of you who are American in the room, I recall a cartoon, Wile E. Coyote in those Roadrunner series. And Wile E. Coyote used to run, and then he would realize only after going off the cliff that, in fact, gravity doesn't begin until we look down. So I hope that we can think about the perception of the real people that are counting on us to make this work. We can only do it by doing it together. So my hometown of Hong Kong is now, sorry, Japan, the longevity capital of the world. And we're looking at women living up to 88, and some companies with retirement ages at 55. That's a big gap. We also have the lowest birth rate of any other country, which is, you can tell it's a really fun place. Let me tell you about Priyanka Gandhi. Her mother was a teacher, and she wanted to work after she retired. And Priyanka was surprised nobody wanted to hire her mother. So she started, in her living room, a platform for people who were retired but did not want to stop working to be on this platform and look for work. And within a very short time, she had 1,000 people sign up. There were bookkeepers, there was teachers, there was the former CFO of Gucci. They all wanted to work. She went to corporations and has, over the last year, tried to educate them to the benefits of this. And she has a Hong Kong government as well, who has looked at her to say, perhaps this is something we should pay attention to. We spent so much time on health, and making those last 10, 20 years really fantastic in terms of health span, but we have not really even thought about work. One company who has hired one of Priyanka's talents is 10th Studio. They are an innovation firm helping beauty entrepreneurs to prototype in Shenzhen, China. Now, like almost any city, Hong Kong is trying to be the center of innovation, and it has poured millions of dollars into entrepreneurship training for children and really for so many people. But it's this moment where 10th Studio has low capital and really low experience, young founder, and they have taken people with massive amounts of experience in manufacturing, in the beauty industry, and they are pairing them in apprenticeships to bring both the drive and experience together to make Hong Kong innovative. So the future of work, I believe, will also be improvisation, or probably more like improv. Let's look at the new normal. These are people who have reinvented themselves over and above. Lori Granito used to be a chef. Now she is a leadership consultant after going from chef to entrepreneur to a global leadership consultant and global speaker. Brian Tang was in Silicon Valley and went to Hong Kong, did 8 of the top 10 IPOs on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, thought probably not going to get that much better. And he left to do the Asia Capital Markets Institute and also started a nonprofit for young people to teach them tech and making skills. Hong Kong University just hired him to be the new head of the Legal Innovation, Technovation, and Entrepreneurship Center. So despite what seems like meandering, his skills are coming together for the jobs of the future. Jascha Kotterman is a Dutch woman. She spent her early career in finance, then went to work in strategic planning at Avon. They sent her all over the world. She takes that global experience and is now investing in agriculture technology in Argentina with a sideline of premium beef imports. Because you always have to have a side hustle in the future of work. So how can we have the policies and the systems and the platforms that will help us go out and support the new normal? Here's just a few examples, and AARP has done a great service to get more examples in your book. Kiwi Saver out of New Zealand is an auto-enrollment for retirement savings that has the government also matching some of the contributions in addition to the employer. Playing for the home team, AARP has partnered with McDonald's so that McDonald's can solve its talent shortage by broadening the perspective of who is a great new employee. Empathy in Hong Kong teaches young people and civil servants what it's like to be older and some of the restrictions or constrictions that might cause so that they can develop new technologies and new social services for the government. And at the bottom, an Israeli startup, which is Intuition Robotics, has decided to focus on the silver economy as an entry point for its at-home robotics that allow people to stay in their homes for longer. So what does it look like? What is this grand vision? What is our purpose? Well, I feel like if we can put a man on the moon, and if we can also figure out how to deep fry a Mars bar, we can solve for this. And I think that what we're solving for, and you've heard it all day, is for people to feel safe. For people to feel relevant and contributing. And for people to feel like they belong. Thank you.
Boy, that was genius, my fellow AARP organizers, to have two speakers who are so smart in their fields presenting with such different speaking styles. I loved it. Way to go, Stacy and Ramsey and the team. I was just at a conference earlier in the week for one of our technology advertisers at Forbes, and it was in San Francisco, and I heard the following phrase: robots won't replace managers. Robots will replace managers who don't work with robots.